Have you ever opened a can of tuna thinking you were choosing one of the healthiest foods in your kitchen? What if that cheap little can was hiding more than fish, more than salt, and more than you ever agreed to feed your family? Before we dive in, do 3 quick things. Tap like if you want more food truth videos, subscribe if you care what ends up on your plate, and share this with the one person in your life who still thinks every tuna can is basically the same. Tuna has one of the best reputations in the grocery store. It is cheap, high in protein, easy to store, and simple to throw into a sandwich, salad, or pasta. That is exactly why this matters. Foods we eat often do the most damage when we stop asking questions. And canned tuna is one of those foods people trust far too quickly. Because once you start looking closely, the label on the front of the can stops telling the whole story. The fish itself may be fine, but the liquid packed around it may not be doing you any favors. The species of tuna matters. The way it was caught matters. The amount of mercury in that fish matters even more. And sometimes, the real danger is not even the tuna. It is the company behind it, the recall history, the sourcing, the additives, or the way the product is engineered to look full while giving you less actual food. That is why this is not just about taste. It is about what you are really paying for, what you are really swallowing, and what risks keep getting dismissed because the can looks familiar. Some brands bulk up the product with broth and water, so you think you are buying solid fish when you are mostly buying drained weight disappointment. Some rely on larger tuna species that naturally carry more mercury. Some wrap themselves in words like sustainable or dolphin safe, while critics and lawsuits paint a very different picture. And in one major recall, the danger was so serious that consumers were told not to eat the product, even if it looked and smelled normal. Now, to be fair, not every canned tuna product belongs in the trash. There are genuinely better options. Some companies test more aggressively for mercury. Some use smaller fish. Some keep the ingredient list clean. Some choose fishing methods that reduce harm to other sea life and offer better traceability. Those brands prove something important. Cleaner tuna is possible. Safer tuna is possible. More honest tuna is possible. So in this video, we are going to separate the cans that raise red flags from the ones that actually deserve space in your pantry. We will move through the major warning signs first, then end with the brands that stand out for cleaner sourcing, lower mercury, better ingredients, or all 3. And as we go, keep one idea in your mind. Legal does not always mean wise. Popular does not always mean safe. Cheap does not always stay cheap when the hidden cost lands on your health. Let's start with a brand almost everyone knows. StarKist has spent years building the image of the everyday tuna brand, the easy grab, the no-think choice. But one of the biggest complaints around some of its products is simple. Too much non-fish filler inside a can sold as fish. Products packed with water and vegetable broth may look generous at first glance, but once drained, the amount of actual tuna can feel underwhelming. That criticism became loud enough to trigger legal action years ago, and the company has also been tied to the larger canned tuna price-fixing scandal that shook the industry. Even if you ignore the courtroom side of the story, the consumer frustration is easy to understand. People buy tuna for tuna, not for a can that looks fuller than it really is. Then there's chicken of the sea, another giant name that sounds wholesome the moment you hear it. But name recognition is not quality control. Some of its lower-end products have drawn the same complaints as other mass-market cans. Too much liquid, too much reliance on broth, and too much effort spent making the contents seem more substantial than they are. In some formulas, soy-related ingredients show up where many buyers are not expecting them. That matters for people with soy allergies or sensitivities, but it also raises a bigger question. Why does tuna need help tasting like tuna in the first place? When a brand leans on extra ingredients to smooth over texture or flavor, it often makes you wonder what needed hiding. Next comes great value, Walmart's budget answer for almost everything. And when you're talking about canned tuna, low price is exactly what makes people lower their guard. But this is where species matters. Solid white albacore usually tastes meatier than chunk light, and that is why many shoppers reach for it. The problem is that albacore generally carries more mercury than light tuna. FDA fish guidance treats canned light tuna as a better, lower mercury choice, while albacore falls into the category that should be eaten more carefully, especially for children and people who are pregnant or breastfeeding. So when a bargain brand offers cheap albacore, the low price can distract from the more important question: how much mercury risk are you accepting each time you stack that can into your cart? Kirkland Signature deserves a harder conversation too, because Costco has a reputation for getting private label products right. But tuna has been one of the categories where that confidence has not protected the brand from controversy. Lawsuits and critics have challenged the company's dolphin-safe marketing around some tuna products, arguing that the supply chain story is not as clean as the label suggests. That kind of accusation matters because most people cannot investigate a tuna supply chain on their own. They trust the front of the can. And once the trust cracks, the product becomes more than lunch. It becomes a reminder of how easily branding can outrun reality. Target's Good and Gather line tries to present itself as the polished middle ground, more thoughtful than basic store brands, more modern, more responsible. But the problem with elevated branding is that the promise gets bigger. If you imply that your tuna is sustainably caught, people assume the hard questions have already been answered. Critics and lawsuits have challenged that image, arguing that the sourcing may still involve methods connected to bycatch and environmental harm. Even if the legal process takes time to settle, the warning for shoppers is already clear. Fancy packaging does not equal moral clarity. Whole Foods is an interesting case because it shows that one kind of improvement does not guarantee excellence in every other area. Greenpeace has ranked Whole Foods at the top of a recent tuna retailer scorecard for stronger policies compared with many competitors. That is real progress. But a more responsible sourcing story does not automatically mean every can tastes good or offers the best value. Some consumers still complain that certain premium tuna products there are dry, oily in the wrong way, or simply overpriced for the experience. So yes, ethics matter. But for many buyers, this is also where disappointment sets in. Paying more hurts a lot more when the food still fails the fork test. And then we get to Kroger, another major chain whose tuna products sit in front of shoppers who assume basic standards have already been met. The challenge here is traceability. Critics have argued that if a retailer does not have strong enough controls over transshipment and other supply chain blind spots, it becomes harder to verify exactly how some fish were caught and handled. That might sound distant and technical, but it is not. Weak traceability is how abuse, illegal fishing, and misleading claims survive. The less you can trace, the more you are forced to trust. And blind trust is exactly what this industry has spent years training consumers to give away. Quick pause, because if this video is already changing how you shop, save it now, subscribe so you do not lose it, and send it to your family group chat with one line. Stop buying tuna on autopilot. Food Lion's canned tuna brings us back to a more familiar warning sign. When a budget product stretches the can with water and broth, you are not just risking bland flavor, you are paying for weight that disappears down the drain. Tuna packed this way often arrives soft, wet, and strangely empty after draining. That does not automatically make it dangerous, but it does make it a poor value. And once a brand is comfortable padding the can, shoppers should become more alert about every other corner that might be getting cut too. Genova is where the conversation turns darker because taste alone is not enough to save a product from a real safety event. In a major FDA-linked recall announcement, Tri-Union Seafoods pulled select canned tuna products sold under Genova, Van Camp's, H-E-B, and Trader Joe's because of a manufacturing defect in easy-open lids that could compromise the seal and raise the risk of contamination with Clostridium botulinum. That is not a minor issue. Consumers were explicitly warned not to eat the product even if it looked and smelled normal. Think about how serious that is. In most kitchens, people trust their senses. But with botulism risk, your eyes and nose are not reliable protection. Bumble Bee has its own long shadow. The brand is massive, familiar, and still one of the biggest names many shoppers see first. But it has also been tied to major controversies, including the tuna price fixing scandal and more recent forced labor allegations involving Indonesian fishers in its supply chain. Reports and lawsuits describe shocking claims, including beatings, withheld pay, extreme isolation at sea, and denial of medical care. Even before you get to the fish in the can, that should stop you cold. Because the can, sitting quietly on a shelf, may carry a human story most buyers never imagined. And once you know that, it becomes harder to dismiss tuna as just another cheap pantry item. Then we have products packed in vegetable oil, especially cheap soybean oil. On the surface, oil-packed tuna can seem richer and more satisfying. Sometimes it tastes better than the watery versions. But this is another place where the product can drift away from what health-conscious buyers think they are choosing. Many people eat tuna partly because they want a simple protein source with beneficial fats. When that fish is sitting in low-grade vegetable oil, especially a heavy omega-6 oil, the nutritional picture gets murkier. Add possible soy sensitivity on top of that, and what looked like a convenient health food starts looking more like a compromise. Geisha-style flavored tuna products show another trap. Once the tuna is buried under sauces, seasonings, and long ingredient lists, the fish itself stops being the star. That often means higher sodium, more masking, and more room for lower quality tuna to hide. Some flavored cans can push sodium surprisingly high for such a small serving. If you already eat packaged foods, bread, sauces, and restaurant meals during the week, that extra salt load adds up faster than most people realize. Tuna is supposed to be one of the cleaner convenience foods. When it starts behaving like a salty snack product, something has gone wrong. And now we reach one of the biggest red flags in the category, Trader Joe's solid white albacore. This is where several concerns pile up at once. First, Albacore already tends to run higher in mercury than light tuna. Second, a 2025 Momavation investigation reported Trader Joe's solid white albacore tuna in water at 788 parts per billion of mercury, one of the highest readings in that roundup. Third, Trader Joe's was also one of the brands caught up in the tri-union recall involving pull-tab lid defects and potential botulism risk on select products. That combination is brutal. Even if not every can is affected by every problem, the pattern is enough to make many shoppers ask a simple question. Why gamble here when other options exist? This is the moment where we need to stop and talk about the real danger hiding behind the whole canned tuna aisle, mercury. Because mercury is the reason two cans that look almost identical on the shelf can carry very different levels of risk. It does not appear on the label in a way most people understand, and it certainly does not announce itself in taste. Mercury gets into oceans through pollution, then bacteria convert it into methylmercury, the form that builds up inside fish and inside human bodies. Small fish pick up a little, bigger fish eat those fish and collect more. Tuna sit higher in that food chain, so by the time they reach your plate, the concentration can be dramatically higher than the water around them. That is why species matter so much. In general, bigger and older tuna carry more mercury. That is why canned light tuna, often made from smaller species like skipjack, is usually the safer everyday choice than albacore. And here's the part many people miss. The FDA's guidance does not say all tuna should be eaten freely in the same way. The advice specifically encourages pregnant or breastfeeding people to choose lower mercury seafood and to eat 2 to 3 servings a week from the best choices list, while albacore tuna should be eaten more carefully than canned light. So when brands flood the market with cheap albacore and shoppers assume white tuna means premium and premium means better, they may be moving in the wrong direction. So if the first half of this video felt uncomfortable, good. It should. Because now we can finally move to the better news. There are canned tuna brands that make a stronger case for being worth your money and your trust. They are not all cheap. They are not all available everywhere, but they show what tuna looks like when a company tries harder. If you have made it this far, hit like only if you learned something useful, subscribe if you want more videos that save you money and health, and share this with someone who still thinks the cheapest can is automatically the smartest buy. Safe Catch is one of the first names people bring up when mercury becomes the main issue, and for good reason. The brand has built much of its identity around testing. Its core promise is simple and powerful. Tighter mercury standards and more aggressive screening than what most shoppers expect from mainstream tuna. That message speaks directly to the biggest fear many people have about eating tuna often. Instead of pretending mercury is a distant technical problem, the brand puts that issue front and center. Just as important, its products tend to avoid the broth and water gimmick that leaves buyers draining away part of what they paid for. Wild Planet is another brand that gets repeated in safer tuna conversations. It leans heavily into once-cooked fish, cleaner ingredient lists, and more responsible fishing methods than the mass market norm. It is also notable in mercury discussions. In the same Momavation roundup that flagged some worrying products, Wild Planet's albacore came in far lower than the worst offenders, at 133 parts per billion in that report. And that does not mean every can from every batch is identical, but it does show an important difference. Not all albacore is equally loaded. If you insist on white tuna, brand selection matters. American tuna sits in the premium lane, and it knows it. This is not the option people buy because it is the cheapest thing at eye level. It is the option they buy when they care about traceability, smaller batch processing, and a cleaner can. The company emphasizes pole and line fishing and a simpler ingredient approach. That matters, because every clean label sends a message. This brand does not need to distract you. It trusts the fish. And in a category full of cans trying to look fuller, brighter, or more flavorful than they really are, that kind of confidence stands out. Fishwife takes a different path. It is less about the old-school survival food image of canned tuna and more about making tinned fish feel premium, modern, and actually exciting. That is important because a lot of people who upgrade from supermarket basics are not just looking for lower risk. They are looking for a better eating experience. If a premium brand can make you want to eat the tuna straight from the tin, not just hide it inside mayo or a casserole, that changes the entire category. It moves tuna from backup food to intentional food. Tonino's Ventresca-style approach appeals to another kind of buyer, the person who wants tuna to taste rich instead of merely acceptable. Belly cuts, better oil, and more careful presentation can transform the texture completely. This matters because one of the quiet failures of cheap canned tuna is that it trains people to believe tuna should be dry, metallic, and forgettable. Better brands break that illusion. They remind you that low-quality tuna is not the standard of nature. It is the standard of corner cutting. Scout offers an interesting example too, especially for people who want convenience without the usual junk packed around it. Snack-style seafood kits can easily become gimmicky, but when the fish quality is solid and the added ingredients stay relatively clean, they show there's still room for innovation in this space without selling out the product. That may sound small, but it matters. Too many packaged foods become worse the moment a brand tries to make them trendy. A better snack format only works if the fish inside still holds up. Pole in Line as a brand sends one of the clearest signals you can ask for right in its name. It tells you the catching method before you even turn the can around. That alone will not guarantee perfect tuna, but it points toward a philosophy that values selectivity over industrial-scale carelessness. People who buy this kind of product are often trying to avoid two things at once: higher mercury fish and high-casualty fishing methods. When the can tastes clean too, not too salty, not too fishy, not too mushy, that is where trust starts to build. And then there is Ortiz, a name that often comes up when people talk about canned tuna, as if it were closer to a delicacy than a prepper staple. This is the kind of tuna that can reset expectations. Good texture, beautiful cuts, better oil, a flavor strong enough to stand on its own. It is expensive, yes, but it proves a larger point. The canned tuna aisle is not only divided into safe and unsafe, it is also divided into thoughtless products and carefully made ones. Ortiz belongs in the second group. Now, none of these brands should be treated like magic. A cleaner brand is not a permission slip to ignore species, serving frequency, or your own health needs. If you are pregnant, breastfeeding, feeding children, or eating tuna constantly, you still need to think in terms of patterns, not just labels. Even a better can is still tuna. Mercury does not care about brand loyalty. But better brands reduce the number of things you have to worry about all at once. Fewer fillers, better transparency, often lower mercury, often better sourcing, often better taste. That brings us to the most important buying rule in this entire video. Stop shopping for tuna by price alone. Price is the easiest number to compare, which is exactly why it tricks people. A cheap can can cost more in the long run if it gives you less fish, more sodium, more questionable ingredients, worse sourcing, or higher mercury exposure. A more expensive can may actually be the smarter buy if it gives you real fish, cleaner oil, fewer additives, and a lower chance of becoming something you regret feeding your body week after week. So, what should you look for the next time you are standing in front of that wall of cans? Start with the species. If you want a more frequent option, canned light tuna usually makes more sense than albacore. Then read the ingredient list. Tuna, maybe salt, maybe olive oil, maybe water. The shorter and clearer the better. Be cautious with vegetable broth, mystery flavor systems, and long seasoning lists that make the product sound more like a packaged dip than fish. After that, look at the brand's sourcing language with some skepticism. Sustainable is a nice word, but it is not self-proving. Look for brands that tell you more, not just brands that tell you prettier stories. One more thing before we land this plane. If a brand has been part of a recall, do not shrug it off just because the odds feel small. Food safety problems matter most in the products you trust enough to keep in your pantry for months. The Tri-Union recall was a wake-up call because it reminded people that even shelf-stable food can become dangerous when packaging fails. And when the FDA tells people not to eat a product even if it seems normal, that is not the time to be casual. Last checkpoint. If this breakdown saved you from one bad purchase, reward the algorithm with a like, subscribe for the next grocery deep dive, and share this video with the person who always says, "It is just tuna, how different can it be?" Here is the deeper truth behind all of this. Canned tuna is not one product. It is a category hiding massive differences under nearly identical packaging. One may contain smaller fish, cleaner ingredients, better handling, and a more responsible supply chain. Another may contain older fish with more mercury, extra liquid to fake fullness, added ingredients to cover weakness, and a company history you would never support if it were printed across the front label. That is why smart shopping in this aisle starts with suspicion, not loyalty. The brands know exactly what most people assume. They assume tuna is healthy by default. They assume white tuna is better because it sounds premium. They assume if something dangerous were really happening, regulators would make it obvious. But grocery shopping does not work that way. Risk hides in the details. The details live in the species, the ingredients, the testing, the sourcing, and the company behavior. And this is what makes mercury such a powerful blind spot. You cannot see it. You cannot smell it. You cannot taste it. And if you eat tuna often, especially high mercury tuna, the risk is not about one dramatic meal. It is about steady accumulation. It is about what repeated exposure can mean for the nervous system over time. It is about the people who are most vulnerable, especially pregnant women, babies in development, and young children, the same people advertisers love to place next to images of healthy family meals. So no, this video is not telling you to panic every time you see a tuna can. It is telling you to graduate from passive buyer to informed buyer. Keep your convenience, keep your protein, keep the products that truly earn your trust. Just stop handing that trust away for free. If you want the simple version, here it is. Be more cautious with cheap Albacore. Be skeptical of cans padded with broth and filler. Be alert to brands with ugly recall histories or weak transparency. Be willing to pay more when the product clearly gives you something better in return. And whenever possible, choose brands that make lower mercury, cleaner ingredients, and better sourcing part of the product instead of part of the marketing speech. Because the biggest lie in the tuna aisle is not that every bad product is instantly deadly. The biggest lie is that all of these cans are basically equal, and they are not. Some are just mediocre, some are misleading, some carry avoidable risks, and a few actually show respect for the people buying them. The next time you hear someone say canned tuna is all the same, remember this video. Remember the recalls. Remember the mercury gap between species. Remember the lawsuits over labels people were supposed to trust. Remember the workers whose suffering may sit invisible behind a cheap shelf price. And remember that a safer choice usually starts with one simple act, reading past the front of the can. So the real question is not whether tuna can be healthy. It can. The real question is whether the can in your hand has earned the right to be called food you trust. And once you know how much can hide inside something this small, you may never look at the tuna aisle the same way again.